I mistakenly cheated with my ex for a valid reason, and my unreasonable husband refused to show me any compassion or get himself therapy. Instead, he divorced me. I'm Elena, 32F. My husband is Daniel, 34M. We've been married for 4 years and together for 6. About a month ago, both of my parents died in a car crash. I still don't really understand how to talk about that without it sounding distant, like I'm explaining something that happened to someone else. It's not even denial. It's more like everything feels slightly out of focus all the time. I'll be standing in the kitchen and suddenly remember my mom texting me about some random recipe, and for a second I expect my phone to buzz again. Then there's just nothing. We live in the same town I grew up in. That's part of what makes this harder. Every street has some version of them in it. The pharmacy where my dad used to argue with the pharmacist about generic brands. The park where my mom walked every morning. Their house is still exactly the same, except now it's quiet in a way that feels wrong. Since it happened, people have been around constantly. My cousins, neighbors, family friends, and people I haven't seen in years showing up with food and stories and that look on their face like they don't know where to stand or what to say. I didn't realize how many people knew my parents until I had to stand there and accept condolences from all of them. Daniel has been there. That's the simplest way to put it. He took time off work, handled calls when I couldn't answer, and made sure I ate even when I didn't feel hungry. He's been doing all the house stuff without saying anything about it. Laundry, groceries, dishes. I haven't had to think about any of that. But there's also been this distance I can't fully explain, not in an obvious way. He still checks on me, still asks if I need anything. But it feels like he's interacting with me the way you would with someone fragile, like he's constantly measuring his words. Careful, polite, like he's afraid of doing something wrong. And maybe that's fair. I haven't exactly been easy to be around. Some days I don't talk much at all. Other days I'll start talking about something completely normal and then just stop halfway through because I forget what I was saying. I've walked into rooms and stood there not knowing why I went in. I've opened my parents' fridge and just stared at it like I was waiting for it to explain something to me. There are moments where everything hits at once too, not even in a dramatic way, just small things. I found one of my dad's jackets draped over a chair the other day, and I couldn't stop thinking about how it still smelled like his cologne. I ended up sitting on the floor holding it longer than I'd like to admit. Daniel saw that. He didn't say anything, just sat next to me for a while. That's kind of how he's been handling everything. Present, but not really, inside it with me. I don't know how to describe it better than that. A lot of people from my past have come back into my life over the past few weeks. That's normal, I think. When something like this happens, people show up. Old classmates, neighbors, people who knew my parents longer than they knew me. Adrian is one of those people. He and I were together all through high school and a couple years after. First real relationship, first everything. It ended years before I met Daniel, and it wasn't messy in the way people usually assume. We just grew into different lives, different plans. It hurt at the time, but it wasn't explosive. The thing is, Adrian wasn't just my ex. He was deeply tied to my family. My parents loved him, not in a casual, they like my boyfriend way, but in a way where he became part of the routine. He'd show up unannounced, and my mom would just hand him a plate like he lived there. My dad used to joke that he had an extra son. Even after we broke up, that didn't completely disappear. He'd still come by sometimes, holidays and random visits, not frequently, but enough that he never felt like a stranger in that house. When Daniel and I got serious, I told him about Adrian. I didn't hide anything. Daniel didn't love it, but he accepted it. At least that's what I believed at the time. There were small moments, though, things I didn't think much of back then. Like the first time Daniel met him at a family gathering. Adrian had brought something my mom liked, some specific dessert from a bakery across town. My mom lit up when she saw him. I remember Daniel standing next to me, quiet, watching that interaction a little too closely. Later that night, he asked a few questions, not aggressive ones, just specific. How often does Adrian come around? Do my parents still talk to him regularly? Do I talk to him outside of these gatherings? I answered honestly. It didn't feel like a big deal. Looking back, I think that was one of those moments that stayed with him longer than it stayed with me. Over time, Adrian's presence faded into the background. He wasn't a daily part of my life. Occasionally a message, sometimes seeing him at family events. That was it, until now. When my parents died, he showed up almost immediately. I didn't even know who had told him. He was just there, standing near the front of the house while people moved in and out. I remember noticing him in this strange, detached way. Like my brain was cataloging faces but not fully processing them. Then he walked over and hugged me, and something about that familiarity hit differently. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even about him, really. It was the fact that he knew my parents in a way Daniel didn't. He had memories with them that existed before my adult life, before my marriage, before everything changed. He said my mom used to make him tea even in the middle of summer because she didn't believe in cold drinks for guests. I'd completely forgotten that. Hearing it felt like someone handed me a piece of something I'd lost. Daniel was there that day too, moving between people, talking to relatives, making sure things were handled. I noticed at one point that he was watching me and Adrian talk. Not in an obvious way, just aware. That same awareness has been there ever since. Adrian has been around more over the past few weeks, not constantly, but enough that it's noticeable. He helped with some arrangements, checked in on my extended family, stopped by a couple of times when other people were around. Every time he came over, Daniel was polite, civil, but quieter than usual. There was one evening where we were all in my parents' living room. A few relatives had just left, and it was me, Daniel, and Adrian sitting there in that heavy silence that comes after a long day of people coming and going. Adrian started talking about a trip my parents took years ago. Something small, about how my dad got lost driving and refused to admit it. I actually laughed. It felt strange, like my body reacted before my brain caught up. I glanced at Daniel when I laughed. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Later that night, after Adrian left, Daniel asked, "Do you think it's helping, having him around this much?" I didn't know how to answer that properly. I said something vague about how it's nice to have people who knew my parents. He nodded, but the conversation didn't really go anywhere. There have been a few moments like that, nothing that turned into an argument, just things left hanging. I'll admit I didn't focus much on his discomfort. That probably sounds bad, but everything in my head has been so loud lately that anything outside of the grief feels distant. A few days ago, I told Daniel I was going to go out and see some family. That wasn't unusual. I've been doing that a lot, going to my parents' house, meeting relatives, sitting around talking or not talking. He offered to come with me. I said I'd go alone. It wasn't meant to exclude him. I just didn't want to feel watched, not by him specifically, but by anyone. There's this pressure when you're around people who are worried about you, like you have to perform your grief in a way that makes sense to them. I left in the evening. I didn't have a strict plan. I just knew I'd end up at my parents' place at some point. Adrian was there. I wasn't surprised exactly. He'd been coming by occasionally, helping sort through things and talking to my aunt about paperwork. We ended up sitting outside for a while. It was quieter than inside. No constant movement, no voices overlapping. At first, the conversation was normal, or as normal as it can be under the circumstances. Talking about my parents, small memories, and random details that didn't seem important until now. He mentioned how my dad used to insist on fixing things himself, even when he clearly didn't know how. I remembered a specific afternoon where the sink was taken apart for hours and somehow ended up worse than before. That kind of thing. We were both drinking, not heavily at first, just something to take the edge off the constant heaviness. At some point, the conversation shifted. It wasn't abrupt, more like it drifted there. He brought up something from when we were younger, a stupid argument we had in high school that somehow felt significant back then. I laughed again, and this time it didn't feel as strange. There was this sense of stepping into a version of myself that existed before everything became complicated. Before marriage, before responsibilities, before losing my parents. I don't mean that in a romantic way. It wasn't about wanting that life back. It was just familiar, comforting, in a way that I didn't realize I needed. I remember thinking that Daniel wouldn't understand this part. Not because he doesn't care, but because he wasn't there. He didn't know me at that age, didn't know my parents in that version of their lives. That thought sat in the back of my mind longer than it should have. We kept talking, kept drinking. Time got a little blurry after that. I do remember checking my phone at one point and seeing missed calls from Daniel. I didn't respond right away. I told myself I would in a minute. I didn't. We moved inside eventually. Most of the lights in the house were off. It felt different at night, quieter, heavier. There's a specific moment I keep replaying even now. We were standing in the kitchen, and Adrian said something about how my mom used to stand in that exact spot while cooking. I could picture it so clearly that it almost felt like she was there for a second. And then I just broke down. Not in a controlled way. It hit all at once. Everything I'd been holding in, everything I hadn't fully processed yet. He hugged me. I didn't think about it. I just leant into it because it was something solid in that moment. I should have stepped back. I didn't. What happened after that? It didn't feel like a decision in the way people think of decisions. It felt like everything blurred together: grief, alcohol, memory, familiarity. And somewhere in that blur, I crossed a line I can't uncross. I didn't go home that night. I wish I could say there was a clear moment where I stopped and thought about what I was doing, where I weighed it properly and made a conscious choice. That's what Daniel seems to believe, that there had to be a point where I could have just walked away and didn't. But the truth is messier than that. After I broke down in the kitchen, everything felt, slowed down, and sped up at the same time. I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. Adrian kept trying to calm me down, saying small things that didn't really matter, just filling the space so I wouldn't feel like I was falling through it. At some point, we ended up sitting on the floor. I don't even remember deciding to sit. My head was against his shoulder, and I remember thinking how strange it was that something so familiar could still exist after so many years. That's the part I keep trying to explain and keep failing at. It wasn't about him as a person in that moment. It was about what he represented. A version of my life where my parents were alive, where everything was simple and predictable, where grief wasn't sitting in my chest like something permanent. He said something about how my mom used to tell him I'd never learned to cook properly because I'd always rush things. I laughed and cried at the same time because it was exactly something she would say. I could hear her voice so clearly that it made my chest hurt. And then it just shifted. I don't remember who leaned in first. I don't remember there being any kind of pause where I thought, this is wrong. I remember the feeling of wanting to hold on to something that felt stable, even if it wasn't real. That's not an excuse. I know how that sounds. I know how it looks from the outside. But inside that moment, it didn't feel like I was choosing between my marriage and something else. It felt like I was trying to stop everything from collapsing in on itself. We ended up in my old bedroom. That part makes me feel sick now, thinking about it in a clear state of mind. That room still had pieces of my life scattered around, old books, photos, things my mom refused to throw away. It should have been the last place something like that happened. Afterwards, there was this heavy silence, not awkward in the usual sense, just heavy. Reality came back slowly, not all at once. I remember sitting at the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to piece together what had just happened. Adrian didn't say much. He looked just as shaken, just as unsure of how to process it. He said, "We shouldn't have done that." I agreed immediately. There wasn't even a part of me that tried to justify it in that moment. I checked my phone again. There were multiple missed calls from Daniel, messages too, short ones at first, then longer ones, asking where I was, if I was okay, if something had happened. That's when it hit me properly. Not just what I'd done, but the fact that I had completely disappeared without telling him anything. I should have called him right then, I know that. That's one of the things he keeps coming back to now. How I didn't even give him the basic respect of letting him know where I was. Instead, I just sat there. I felt this wave of dread that made it hard to even move, like if I stood up and left, everything would become real in a way I wasn't ready to face yet. Adrian asked if I wanted him to drive me home. I said no. I didn't want Daniel to see us together like that. I didn't want to deal with any of it yet. I ended up staying there the rest of the night. Not sleeping, just lying there, replaying everything in pieces. There wasn't a single thought that made sense. It was just fragments. Daniel's face, my mom's voice, the look on my dad's face the last time I saw him, the missed calls on my phone, the realization of what I'd done layered over all of it. By morning, I felt numb more than anything else. Adrian and I barely spoke. There wasn't anything to say that would fix it. He kept his distance, like he understood that whatever happened between us didn't belong in daylight. I left early. The drive home felt longer than it actually was. I kept thinking about what I was going to say and how I was going to explain it, and every version sounded worse the more I ran through it. When I walked in, Daniel was already up. He was in the living room, sitting on the couch. He looked like he hadn't slept. That image is stuck in my head now. He stood up as soon as he saw me. There was this moment where neither of us said anything. I could see the questions in his face, but also something else, something tighter, more controlled. He asked where I'd been. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there trying to get the words out in a way that didn't make everything worse instantly. I said, "I messed up." That's how it came out. Not planned, just the first thing that felt honest. He didn't react immediately. He just looked at me, waiting. I started apologizing before I even explained. I don't think I've ever said sorry that many times in such a short span. It felt automatic, like if I kept saying it, maybe it would soften what was coming next. He told me to just tell him what happened. So I did. I didn't go into every detail, but I didn't hide the core of it either. I told him I was with Adrian, that we were drinking, that we were talking about my parents, and that I slept with him. There was a long pause after that. I expected anger. I expected something immediate, something loud or sharp. That would have made more sense to me. Instead, he just went quiet. Not the same quiet as before. This was different, more distant. He nodded slightly, like he was processing it in a very controlled way. He said he needed time to think. That was it. No questions right away, no accusations. Just that. I didn't know how to react to that. Part of me was relieved that it didn't turn into a confrontation in that moment. Another part of me felt like that silence was worse. Over the next few hours, I kept trying to talk to him. Trying to explain, to give context, to make him understand that it wasn't about wanting someone else or replacing him. He listened, but there was this wall there. At one point, he asked, "Did you think about me at all?" I didn't know how to answer that honestly without making things worse. Because the truth is, in that moment, I wasn't thinking clearly about anything. Not in a way that fits into a clean answer. I tried to explain that, and I could see it didn't land the way I meant it to. To him, it sounded like I was saying he didn't matter enough to even cross my mind. And I get why that would hurt. But from my side, it wasn't about him not mattering. It was that everything else was so overwhelming that I wasn't grounded in reality the way I should have been. That distinction doesn't seem to mean anything to him. Since then, he's been distant in a way that feels different from before. Before, it was like he was being careful with me because of what I was going through. Now, it feels like he's pulling away completely. He still talks when necessary, still responds if I ask something directly. But there's no warmth in it, no sense of partnership. I've apologized more times than I can count. I've tried to explain the context, the emotional state I was in, and how it all blurred together. He hears it, but I can tell he doesn't accept it. To him, it comes down to one thing. I chose to do something that betrayed him. And again, I understand that perspective. I'm not pretending that what I did wasn't wrong. But I feel like he's looking at it in isolation, without considering everything else that was happening around it. This wasn't a normal situation. I wasn't in a normal state of mind. I lost both of my parents at the same time. Everything in my life shifted overnight. I've been trying to function through something I don't even fully understand yet. And instead of seeing that, it feels like he's focusing on this one moment as if it defines everything. He asked me later why I didn't come home that night. I didn't have a good answer. Not one that sounds reasonable when said out loud. I told him I didn't know how to face him right away, that I felt stuck, like I couldn't move forward or backwards. He said that made it worse. That part I do understand. What I'm struggling with is the way he's handling it now. He hasn't said he wants to leave, but he hasn't said he wants to work through it either. He just exists in this in-between space where everything feels uncertain. I suggested we talk to someone, a therapist, counselor, anything. Not just for this, but for everything that's happened over the past month. He didn't say no, but he didn't agree either. He just said he needs time. And I don't know how much time that means. I feel like I'm losing two things at once now, my parents and my marriage. And I don't think he fully sees how those things are connected for me, even if they shouldn't be in the way they ended up being. It's been a little over 3 weeks since that night. The house feels different now, and not just because of what happened. There's this constant sense of something unfinished between us, like every conversation is sitting on top of something heavier that neither of us is fully addressing. Daniel has settled into this routine where everything is functional. He goes to work, comes home, eats, and asks basic questions if needed. He still does things around the house and still makes sure bills are paid and groceries are stocked. From the outside, it probably looks like we're just a quiet couple going through a rough patch. But there's no connection in it, no small talk, no random comments about things we used to share, no checking in beyond surface-level things like, "Did you eat?" or "Are you going out today?" The first few days after I told him, I kept trying to close that gap. I'd sit next to him and try to talk about what happened in a way that wasn't defensive. I told him I understood why he was hurt. I told him I wasn't minimizing it. I told him I wasn't trying to justify it. But I also tried to explain the state I was in that night. I told him it didn't come from a place of wanting Adrian. It came from being overwhelmed, from being in an environment that brought everything back at once, from not thinking clearly. Every time I explained that, I could see the same reaction in his face. Not anger exactly, more like rejection of the explanation itself. Like he hears the words but doesn't accept the premise behind them. At one point, he said, "You keep describing it like something that just happened to you." That stayed with me. Because I don't think that's what I'm doing. I'm not saying I had no role in it. I know I did. I know I crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed under any circumstance, but I also think context matters, and I feel like he's refusing to consider any context at all. To him, it's simple. I went out, I met my ex, I slept with him, I didn't come home. End of story. There's no space in that version for grief, for confusion, or for the way trauma can affect judgment. A week after everything happened, he asked more direct questions, not emotional ones, factual ones. How much did you drink? Who initiated it? Have you talked to him since? I answered everything honestly. I told him we both had been drinking, that I genuinely don't remember who initiated it first, and that no, I haven't spoken to Adrian since that morning. That last part is true. I haven't reached out, he hasn't either. It's like that entire connection shut off the moment reality came back. Daniel listened, nodded, and then just moved on. No reaction beyond that. That almost felt worse than if he had got angry, because it made it seem like he had already made up his mind about everything and was just confirming details. There was one conversation that stands out more than the others. I asked him directly what he was thinking, not about the past, but about us now. He took a long time to answer. Then he said, I don't know who I'm supposed to be to you after this. I didn't fully understand what he meant at first, so I asked him to explain. He said, you went to someone else on a night like that. Not just anyone, him. That means something, whether you want it to or not. I tried to tell him that it doesn't mean what he thinks it means. That it wasn't about choosing Adrian over him. That it was about being in a space filled with memories and not handling it properly. He shook his head slightly and said, you keep separating those things. I don't think they're separate. That's where we keep getting stuck. He sees everything as connected in a way that leads to one conclusion. I see it as a series of overlapping factors that led to a bad decision. Neither of us is convincing the other. I've suggested therapy more than once now. Not in a we're broken, fix us way. More like, we clearly aren't communicating this well on our own. I told him I don't expect him to just move past it. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for a way to actually work through it, instead of sitting in this silence where nothing improves. He hasn't rejected the idea outright, but he hasn't agreed either. He says things like, I need to figure out if there's something to work on first. That scares me, because to me, that sounds like he's already halfway out, just not saying it directly. At the same time, I don't think he's being fair in how he's approaching this. And I know that might sound defensive, but I've thought about it a lot before even admitting that to myself. I understand being hurt. I understand questioning things. I understand needing time. What I don't understand is shutting down completely and treating this like a final verdict instead of something complicated that needs to be unpacked. He's acting like my actions came from a clear, stable place, and that I made a calculated decision that reflects how I feel about him or our marriage. That's not how it happened. And the fact that he won't even consider that perspective makes me feel like he's not actually trying to understand me at all. There's also something else that's been sitting in the back of my mind. Before all of this, there were moments where I could tell he wasn't fully comfortable with Adrian still being part of my extended circle. He never pushed it into a confrontation, but it was there, small things. The way he'd go quiet if Adrian came up in conversation. The way he'd ask questions that seemed casual but had an edge to them. I didn't take it seriously enough at the time. I thought it was just normal insecurity that would fade as our relationship continued. Now I'm starting to wonder if this situation is reinforcing something he already believed on some level, like he sees this as confirmation of something he's been holding on to quietly for years. And if that's the case, then we're not just dealing with one incident. We're dealing with a buildup that I didn't fully recognize when it was happening. I don't know how to address that if he won't talk about it. Right now, it feels like I'm the only one trying to move forward, even if that movement is messy and imperfect. He's just paused. Waiting, maybe. Deciding something internally without letting me in on it. I've even asked him directly if he wants to separate. He said, I haven't decided anything yet. That answer somehow feels heavier than a yes or no, because it means everything is still hanging there without direction. I'm not trying to erase what I did. I know it was wrong. I know it hurt him. I know it damaged something between us. But I also think the way he's handling it now is making it impossible for anything to heal. There's no space for conversation, no space for understanding, no space for rebuilding anything, just distance. And I don't think that's sustainable if there's any chance of this marriage continuing. I keep coming back to the same thought. If the roles were reversed, and he had done something like this while going through something that overwhelming, I don't think I would reduce it to a single act without looking at everything around it. I'd be hurt, yes. I'd be angry. but I'd still try to understand how it happened before deciding what it means for us. That's what I feel like I'm not getting from him. Understanding. Not forgiveness right away. Not acceptance. Just an attempt to actually see the situation in full instead of narrowing it down to one moment. I don't know what the right outcome is here. I don't know if we stay together or not, but I do know that the way things are right now doesn't feel like a real attempt to figure that out. It just feels like waiting for something to break completely. And I don't think I can sit in that indefinitely while also dealing with everything else I've lost. So I'm trying to figure out if I'm expecting something unreasonable from him, or if he's shutting down in a way that's preventing any real resolution. Because from where I'm standing, this doesn't feel like something that should automatically end a marriage without at least trying to work through it properly. But maybe I'm wrong. You are saying Daniel isn't seeing the full situation, but I don't think you're seeing his full situation either. You disappeared overnight after telling him you were going to see family. He called you, called other people, and probably spent hours thinking you were dead, hurt, drunk somewhere, or in another crash because your parents literally just died in one. Then you came home and told him you slept with the exact man he had always felt uneasy about. Grief explains why you were vulnerable. It does not erase the fact that Daniel got emotionally punched in the face at the worst possible time too. Also, therapy is fine, but he needs therapy because he's thinking irrationally. Sounds like you want a professional to tell him his pain is inconvenient. He may be calm because he's broken inside, not because he lacks compassion. You lost your parents. That is horrific. But he lost the version of his marriage he trusted. Both can be true. Adrian is not some innocent grief ghost who floated into this by accident. He knew you were married. He knew your parents saw him like family. He knew that house, that history, that bedroom, all of it. He was grieving too, sure, but he still participated in something that detonated your life. And you're doing this thing where Adrian is described like a symbol instead of a grown man with choices. He represented my past. Okay, but he also had sex with a grieving married woman in her dead parents' house. That's not poetic, that's ugly as hell. Daniel probably isn't only reacting to the cheating, he's reacting to realizing the person he was told not to worry about was absolutely worth worrying about. That would make anyone question every old moment, every time he felt brushed off, and every time you said it was harmless. You can ask for counseling. You cannot ask him to pretend the context makes Adrian less central. It makes him more central. You're asking for compassion while framing Daniel's reaction as the problem almost as much as your choice. Your grief is real. Your shock is real. Your parents dying like that is the kind of thing that can scramble a person's brain. I believe you when you say you were not sitting there plotting to cheat. But Daniel is allowed to look at the result instead of your internal fog. Marriage depends on trust, not only intent. From his side, his wife left alone, ignored his calls, slept with her first love, stayed out all night, and came back saying it just happened. That phrase would make me lose my damn mind. The hard truth is, therapy may help you understand each other, but it may also help him leave cleanly. It is not a guarantee he becomes more compassionate in the way you want. Your best chance is to stop arguing the meaning of the betrayal and start owning the damage without trying to manage his reaction. Right now, he may not believe your remorse because every explanation seems to come with a request that he soften faster. After sitting in that silence for days, I pushed for something concrete. I couldn't keep living in that in-between where he barely spoke, and I kept guessing what he was thinking. So I told him we needed to actually talk, not just exist around each other. That turned into me suggesting that he speak to Adrian directly. I know how that sounds. I didn't suggest it casually. My thinking was that a lot of what Daniel was holding on to had to do with what he believed Adrian represented. I thought if they actually spoke, if Adrian told him directly that there was nothing ongoing, nothing emotional being carried forward, it might at least remove that part from the equation. Daniel didn't like the idea. He said it wouldn't change anything. I kept pushing. Looking back, I think I pushed because I needed something external to shift his perspective, and I didn't trust that anything I said would land anymore. He eventually agreed, but it was clear he wasn't doing it because he believed in it. They met a few days later. I wasn't there for most of it, but I was nearby because I didn't want it turning into something worse. It didn't go well. From what I gathered afterwards, it started off controlled, then shifted quickly. Daniel asked direct questions. Adrian answered them. At some point, Daniel asked him if he had ever still had feelings for me. Adrian didn't give a clean yes or no. He said something along the lines of, "That kind of history doesn't just disappear." That was enough. Daniel took that as confirmation of everything he already believed. Voices were raised. Not in a dramatic, physical way, but enough that it stopped being a conversation and turned into something else. Daniel left early. Adrian didn't try to follow him. When Daniel came back home, he didn't even look at me at first. When he did speak, it wasn't to continue the discussion. He just said, "That didn't help. It made it worse." I tried to explain that Adrian wasn't saying anything current, just acknowledging the past, but Daniel cut that off immediately. He said I was still interpreting things in a way that minimized what was right in front of me. After that, whatever thin layer of openness was left just disappeared. Around the same time, I was still going through my parents' house, sorting documents, clothes, and things that had to be dealt with. I found something I didn't expect: my dad's old watch. It wasn't expensive, but he wore it constantly. I remember him checking the time even when he didn't need to, like it was just part of his routine. Inside the box was a note, not formal, not part of a will, just something written in his handwriting. It mentioned Adrian, not in a big, dramatic way. Just a line about how he hoped Adrian would always find his way back to people who felt like home. I don't think it was meant as something serious or legal. It read more like something my dad wrote casually at some point and kept. But I made the mistake of telling Daniel about it. I didn't frame it carefully. I said it in a way that sounded like I was pointing out how much Adrian meant to my parents. Daniel's reaction was immediate, not loud, but sharp. He said, "So even your dad saw him as part of your life like that?" I tried to correct it, saying it wasn't about me, it was just how my parents saw him as a person. It didn't land. To him, it was just another piece reinforcing that Adrian was never really gone from my life the way he thought. There was another issue that came up too: the timeline. Daniel went back through the night in a way I hadn't expected. He asked about when I stopped responding, when exactly things shifted, and how long I was at the house before everything happened. I answered as honestly as I could, but I couldn't give him exact times. Parts of that night are still unclear to me. That frustrated him more. He said it felt like there were gaps I couldn't or wouldn't fill in. I told him I wasn't hiding anything, that I genuinely didn't remember everything in sequence. He didn't say I was lying, but he didn't accept it either. At one point, he said, "You remember the parts that explain it, not the parts that matter to me." That stuck. Around all of this, I was still going back to my parents' house, not constantly, but enough that it became a pattern. Daniel noticed. He asked me why I kept going there alone. I told him it helped me feel close to them, that it was the only place where things felt real instead of distant. He said he couldn't separate that house from what happened there. I told him that was unfair, that the house wasn't defined by one night. He said it wasn't just one night to him. We went in circles on that for a while. At some point, I also made things worse in a way I didn't fully realize until after. Someone in my extended family made a comment about Adrian, something negative, implying he took advantage of the situation. I responded by saying it wasn't like that he was grieving too, that it wasn't some calculated thing. Daniel heard that. Later, he asked me why I was defending him. I said I wasn't defending him, just explaining context. He said it sounded exactly like defending him. There was also something else I didn't think would become an issue, but did. When I was clearing out my old room, I found a shirt I had worn that night. I didn't throw it out immediately. I kept it with a pile of things I wasn't ready to deal with. Daniel saw it later. He asked why I still had it. I didn't have a clear answer. I said something vague about not sorting everything yet. He didn't push it, but I could tell it added to everything else in his head. The tension kept building like that, piece by piece. At some point, I brought up therapy again, this time more directly. I told him that the way he was handling this, shutting down, refusing to engage beyond surface-level interactions, wasn't sustainable. I said we needed professional help, not just for the marriage, but for everything surrounding it. He said he didn't think therapy would change what had already happened. I said it wasn't about changing the past, it was about how we move forward. That's when the conversation shifted. I told him, maybe more bluntly than I should have, that his reaction felt rigid, that he wasn't allowing any room for nuance, for context, for the reality of what I was going through. I also said that the way people had responded overall online, some friends, and even parts of his reaction felt like there was no compassion for grief, only judgment for the outcome. He didn't react immediately. Then he said, "You keep asking for compassion while telling me I'm wrong for how I feel." That ended that conversation. After that, things became more practical. We talked about the house, finances, and what things would look like if we separated, not in a fully decided way, just preparing. A few days later, he told me he had spoken to a lawyer. He didn't present it as a threat, just information. He said he had started the process. That was the point where it stopped feeling like something we might work through and started feeling like something that was already ending. We're currently still in the same house, but not in the same space. It feels more like two people managing logistics than a couple. I don't think we're getting back together. Not because I suddenly don't care, but because the way everything unfolded doesn't feel like something either of us can step back from. I also want to be clear about something because I know how it looks. I am not with Adrian. I haven't spoken to him since that morning. There's nothing ongoing there. Whatever that night was, it didn't turn into anything beyond that. My family knows everything now, not every detail, but enough. They've been supportive in a way I didn't expect. Not dismissing what I did, but also not reducing me to just that one moment. Right now, I'm trying to figure out what my life looks like without my parents and without my marriage at the same time. I don't know if there's a version of this where things could have gone differently if either of us handled it better. But at this point, it doesn't feel like that matters anymore. I'm not going to soften this in a way that excuses what she did, because the core issue here doesn't change no matter how much context you add. Elena didn't just make a mistake, she made a series of decisions that directly broke trust and then followed it up with a pattern of thinking that made it worse. What's interesting and worth understanding is how she made it worse, because that's where the real lesson is. Most people focus only on the act. She slept with her ex. That's obviously wrong. But what actually ends the marriage here isn't just the act, it's what comes after. She keeps trying to move the conversation away from responsibility and toward explanation, and that's where everything collapses. There's a difference between, "This is why I did something wrong," and "This is why what I did shouldn't be seen the way you're seeing it." She's doing the second one. Even when she says she knows it was wrong, she keeps circling back to reframing it. Grief, confusion, familiarity. Emotional collapse. Those things can explain behavior, but they don't reduce the weight of the outcome. And Daniel understands that instinctively. From his side, this is very simple in a way that's hard to argue against. He trusted her. She went to see family. She disappeared. She slept with the one person he had always been uneasy about. She didn't come home. That sequence doesn't need interpretation to hurt. It stands on its own. Now look at what happens next, because this is where she really loses him. She pushes for Adrian to talk to Daniel. That's not just a bad idea. It shows a fundamental misunderstanding of the damage. Daniel doesn't need clarification from Adrian. He doesn't need reassurance from the guy she cheated with. Forcing that interaction doesn't resolve anything. It validates Adrian's importance in the situation. And when Adrian says something vague, like "that kind of history doesn't just disappear," that's it. That's the confirmation Daniel never wanted but now has. At that point, Daniel isn't just dealing with a one-time betrayal. He's dealing with the realization that this person has always had a place in her life that never fully closed, and Elena keeps reinforcing that without realizing it. The inheritance note. The way she talks about how Adrian knew her parents, defending him when others criticize him. Individually, these things might seem small. Together, they paint a picture Daniel can't ignore. And here's the part people underestimate: pattern recognition. When trust is broken, people stop taking things at face value and start looking for patterns. Daniel isn't reacting to isolated incidents anymore, he's connecting them. And what he sees is long-standing emotional overlap, unresolved attachment, even if she denies it, and a willingness to cross a line when vulnerable. Once someone reaches that conclusion, it's incredibly hard to reverse. Now let's talk about her biggest mistake after the cheating itself. She keeps telling him he's being too rigid. That's a terrible move in this situation, because what he hears is, "You're reacting wrong to what I did." And that shuts down any remaining willingness to engage. If someone hurts you deeply and then tells you your reaction lacks nuance or compassion, it doesn't make you more open, it makes you withdraw further. That's exactly what Daniel does. He doesn't yell. He doesn't fight endlessly. He starts detaching. And people often misread that as coldness. It's not. It's decision-making. He's realizing that he can't trust her version of events fully because of memory gaps. He can't trust the boundaries around Adrian because of history and what happened, and he can't have a conversation about it without being told his reaction is flawed. At that point, what's left to work with? This is why therapy doesn't land for him the way she expects. She sees therapy as a place to unpack complexity. He likely sees it as a place where the situation will be reframed again in ways that dilute the core issue. And to be fair to him, that's already happening in their conversations. So when she pushes therapy while also insisting he's not responding correctly, it doesn't feel like help. It feels like pressure to accept her interpretation. Now, the timeline issue. This is bigger than she realizes. When she says she doesn't remember parts of the night, she's being honest. But from his perspective, that creates uncertainty in the worst possible place. Because now he's left thinking, if I don't have the full picture, how do I know what actually happened? And once doubt enters like that, it doesn't stay contained, it spreads. He starts questioning not just that night, but everything connected to it. That's why his questions become more precise. He's trying to lock down reality in a situation where it feels unstable, and she can't give him that stability. So he stops trying to get it from her. That's when the relationship effectively ends, even if they're still living together. Now about her claim that people lack compassion for her grief. This is where she loses credibility. Grief does not give someone a pass to betray their partner. It explains vulnerability, but it doesn't excuse actions. And more importantly, Daniel is also dealing with something heavy here. He didn't lose parents, but he lost trust in his marriage in a sudden, disorienting way. And instead of recognizing that as something valid, she keeps comparing emotional weight. I went through something worse, so my reaction should be understood more. That's not how it works in relationships. Pain isn't a competition where the bigger loss justifies the bigger mistake. Both things can be serious at the same time. She doesn't fully accept that, and that's part of why this doesn't recover. Now, the ending him filing for divorce. This isn't impulsive. This is what happens when someone reaches a point where trust is broken, attempts to repair, feel misaligned, and future risk feels too high. He's not reacting to just what happened. He's reacting to what it suggests could happen again under similar emotional pressure. And he doesn't believe that risk is manageable. That's a rational conclusion, even if it's painful. As for Elena saying she has no intention of getting back together, that reads less like clarity and more like acceptance after the fact. Because nothing in her actions shows someone who truly wanted to rebuild in the way that would have mattered to him. Rebuilding after something like this requires full ownership without reframing, prioritizing the injured partner's reality first, and cutting off anything that reinforces the threat, including Adrian, emotionally and symbolically. She didn't do that consistently. Instead, she kept trying to balance, I was wrong with, but you need to understand why and respond differently. That balance doesn't hold in situations like this, and that's the core takeaway here. The betrayal didn't just happen in one night. It continued in smaller ways afterward, through defensiveness, through misaligned priorities, through pushing interpretations that didn't match the damage done. That's why this didn't recover. Not because it was impossible, but because the way it was handled made recovery less and less likely at every step. Thank you for watching the video. If you are interested in listening to these kinds of stories, we've got more in store for you. Simply subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and share it with your friends.